Hey there, Detective Justin.
Hey there, Detective Dan.
Did you hear about the huge robbery last night in the mall?
No, what happened?
Yeah, someone broke in and stole all the toilets. All of them. I sent a squad to investigate, but they had nothing to go on.
Well, did you hear what happened to me this morning? I'm driving into the precinct and I see a car parked in a place where it shouldn't, right in front of a no parking sign. I stop, get out, and see the driver brazenly in his car. I ask him why he parked there, and he said the sign said fine for parking here.
Unbelievable. Well, last night, one of my crew arrested a guy for being drunk and disorderly in public. Puts him in a cell. I go down to see him just as he's waking up, and he goes, "Hey, officer, why am I in here?" So I say, "For drinking." And he goes, "Great, when do we start?"
People wouldn't believe us if we told them this stuff. For example, I pulled somebody over today and said, "Do you have any idea how fast you were going?" They turned around and said to me, "Isn't it your job to tell me?"
Anyway, I have to dash, Justin. I'm on a new case myself this morning. Someone has stolen the wheels off all the police cars. My team are working tirelessly to catch a criminal responsible.
Oi, oi,
Yes, hello and welcome to another episode of Pilot Views, the episode of Casting Views where I, along with my good friend Justin Henson. Hi, Justin.
Dan, hello again. It's been too long. I am excited to see you, and I'm excited for the new Pilot Views.
Yeah, we take a show and we cast our views on it. One thing I want to say, obviously based on the pre-intro monologue we had or dialogue we had, I've got a feeling another co-host of yours or frequent collaborator of yours is probably calling the police on us for that skit right now. So keep an eye out and an ear out.
Pretty sure he's writing a review on our skit right now, just swearing and cursing the entire way down that review.
Antonio, I know it's been a while, but you thought we'd forget. So, right, yeah, it has been, you said it so, it has been too long. So it's been a while since we've done one of these. And actually at time of recording, I've been on a bit of a break. So I've literally forgotten how to set all this up, it feels like. And this won't go out for a while, but we are recording pretty much the week before Christmas. So how's the festive film season been treating you?
It is going okay. So I know I've been quite a bit bitter in the last year or so, but you know what? There's been some okay movies coming out, and honestly, we're in that final couple weeks where, fingers crossed, we get something, because I am absolutely terrified that we are going to have such a lazy Academy Awards this year. But you know what? It's been all right. So there's nothing that makes me happier, even when seeing a bad movie, than during this time of year, going into the theater with the festivities, the decorations, and watching a movie, even if it's absolutely crappy.
Well, this is going out over a month, so it won't be a spoiler, but have you watched the new, because again, it's at time of recording, it's brand new on Netflix, Carry On?
Yes, and that is, again, this is coming out later, but that is on this week's review. But since this is coming out later, I loved Carry On.
Oh, excellent.
So Carry On is, honestly, just to give a snippet, is one of those thrillers that takes us back to the 90s as simplistic thrills of just the situation, the conflict, a likable villain. Jason Bateman does a great job. It is a very simplistic thriller that doesn't utilize special effects. It really utilizes the characters. It is one of those that I couldn't take my eyes off of. It's kind of a must-see when it comes to anything streaming right now.
I'm pleased you said that, because I watched it last night, and yeah, it does harken back to those old films, and I like how it's set in one place, basically, the airport. It builds up that kind of tension. I love Jason Bateman, again, in a villain role. We've spoken about him on here in Ozark. And yeah, it was just to switch your brain off for an hour and a half and just have a good old action film again, you know?
It reminded me of 1994's Speed, where you have just kind of a simplistic, ludicrous to an extent situation, but the characters make it work. And Jason Bateman is the Dennis Hopper in this movie that really does, almost really, to an extent, made me root for him a little bit, because there is some smart dialogue that actually makes us like him, then hate him, then like him. And it's a curiosity. So Jason Bateman really did make this movie. And it really does bring me back to my first reaction of how I viewed Speed from 1994. So it's a brilliant film.
Yeah, and the last thing, because we're not here to talk about that, I did like that action sequence on the highway. You know, where there's a fight in the car and the camera's almost doing a 360 around it, and there's things happening outside the car as well as inside, but it's all from within the car.
It's funny you said that, because when that shot happened, it really is so unique because it's contradicting to the rest of the movie, that it really does. It's one of the kind of first and few scenes that's outside of the airport, and it really utilizes it to take advantage of it. So I had to rewind that scene a little bit, because I'm like, that is very unique. And it really does grab our attention. It is a well shot scene.
We're not talking about that, but it kind of links with this. And obviously, the skit we did at the start was all police based. So we are going to talk about Brooklyn Nine-Nine. And it's one I think we've been skirting around wanting to do for a while, or talking about it. We've finally got round to it. I'll say hands down now, it's one of my favourite shows. Or it's one of the ones I love having on in the background. It's one of those feel good shows. Tell you what though, before we get into it, we are going to hear from the Game Club pod, the wonderfully, wonderfully, wonderfully lovely Game Club pod. Go check them out if you're not already.
Welcome to my friendly Game Club, where everyone is welcome. The podcast where we share, we play, we run and sing. Well, we don't run, but we do sing.
Hey kids, are you looking for a new favourite fortnightly video game review podcast?
Then boy howdy have we got the show for you.
We take a different game every 2 weeks and we review them just like a book club.
You can find us on all good podcasting platforms.
And some of the sketchy ones too.
Simply search for the Game Club podcast and join the club today.
I actually love Joey, Tim and Alex and that trailer, so do go check them out. So yeah, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, 8 seasons, 153 episodes, created by Dan Gore and Michael Schur, who, if I remember right, is Mose from The Office. Premiered on September the 17th, 2013. And weirdly, it was another one of those shows I saw that got cancelled in 2018 by Fox after 5 seasons. But the next day, NBC picked it up for the 6th season. Then the 7th season aired in 2020 with a 10-episode 8th and final season, which went out in 21. So it's already, well, it's half a year off from being 4 years old, the finale. So the brief premise is it's set in the fictional 99th precinct of the New York City Police Department in Brooklyn. Brooklyn Nine-Nine follows a team of detectives, which we'll go into after, headed by Captain Raymond Holt, who is assigned as their new commanding officer in the pilot episode. And actually, before I hand over to you, firstly, I do want to say I hadn't realised it's a year now, but I guess you can't start this without talking about Andre Braugher. I hope I'm saying that right. He passed away a year ago, actually this month, and it's one of those ones that when it got announced on news, it did actually hit me. It did stop because like I said, I'm not going to lie, and this show has been on in our house on and off for the last sort of 6-7 years. And Holt is probably one of my favourite characters in that, and he plays it so well. And yeah, it was just such a shock and shame when we heard about his passing.
It absolutely was. And I think when I heard it, I popped it into our group chat, because that one does hurt, because he was, in my opinion, one of those underutilized actors that really didn't get to show his true potential until this show. And he really did have some truly good performances utilizing what he identified as his own personality. He was recognizable of, that guy, when it comes to movies and TV shows, from House to Mist to Poseidon. He is one of those guys that really did home in on how he utilized his range. He didn't really stir away from that. He was that stern character, but we loved him because when we get that moment from his performances of adding a little bit of heart, even though a stern heart, especially in Brooklyn Nine-Nine, it was refreshing, and we rooted to see the inner child, the inner emotion from this character. So he was a very talented man and just a likable person on screen. And not a lot of people can pull off that likability with such a stern face, but he did.
He absolutely did. That character was really his own. And as you say, he was able to portray a number of personas. As you said, ultimately he was there to be, initially at the start, the stuffy intellectual boss who's come in over this ragtag bunch of, they are kind of misfits, and we'll go into that. But he also was like the father figure, and he also was the friend, and it flipped between him showing genuine emotion in the Holt way, which we'll go on about, and yeah, there being some genuinely touching moments between the characters. So I feel, yeah, we had to start the episode by respecting his performance in this. The first question, I think, as I normally do for you, is, so what was your experience with this? How can you remember how you fell upon this or watched this? And yeah, talk to me about your history with Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
Well, this is going to be kind of an awkward transition after just praising a beloved man. Is open and honest, I hated this show when I first saw it. This one has a unique taste to it. It really does, because here's kind of my initial problems with it. And I'm not saying it's a horrible show, because I ended up liking it. It was, the performances were the same over and over again, just put in different situations. It's almost like listening to a hum over and over again. It just becomes a little mesmerizing. They had funny moments, but those funny moments almost copied and pasted the next episode, the next cliche, until I just got mentally exhausting. And I think when I started, and don't get me wrong, I watched it over and over again. I followed it. There is a certain thing about this show that really did have me coming back. And I think it is the performances that really did do it for me. But I think it was a blessing for this to kind of take a small break and then continue it, because it was a mental break. It gave us a kind of a breath of the show to kind of continue what's going to happen next. And we did see a change in the second half of the final seasons, where it did kind of almost slow down a little bit to appreciate the characters, versus when Fox had it, it was just one joke after another. So I liked the second half, the last 3 seasons, I think it is, better than the first, because that's where we really get into the nitty gritties of the characters when it comes to a comedy. We don't get real in depth, but we do get a little bit more substance when it comes to the situations they're in, to really get to know the characters a little bit. And that's what I really did end up liking about it. If it wasn't for the last seasons, I wouldn't have had the urge to go back and revisit the first and appreciate it a little bit more. So to me, I ended up holistically liking the show. I watched it when it first aired, and I watched it all the way to the end. But to me, I think the second half of the seasons are going to be the more important ones.
You know, that's a really interesting point to say, because I tend to, when we come to rewatch it, I tend to like the first couple of seasons, and I think that's maybe because it is at its most sitcom-y. We'll mention it. This does have the classic sitcom element of, it does do some serious things. I think it does it generally well. The final season, I think, suffered from being a shorter season, but we'll come on to that. But yeah, I do wonder if, as you said, maybe, yeah, the second batch of, if you're looking at it as an 8-season run, does go a bit more into some of the characters and their personas, and maybe I just prefer the fast, joke. I think generally overall, I don't think there's a standout bad season. I think the premise that it's based on lends itself to some hit and miss episodes, but that's the same with any show that goes on a 153 episode run, right?
Yeah, every TV show, especially with that many seasons, that many shows, you're going to have kind of the bad season. But I think you're absolutely right. There wasn't one season that was just, you know what, drop it, forget it, it's worse than the previous seasons. I think strategically, when you have kind of what I spoke to earlier, kind of the copy and paste, they have the formula, like almost like an SNL skit that just goes for 153 episodes. It really is hard to pinpoint a bad season, because all that is different situations with our characters, and we have some adjusted lines to it. So it's very formula when it comes to how it presents itself. But the one thing I have a problem with, especially in the first piece of the seasons is it's hard to pinpoint, for me at least, memorable scenes because it all kind of just runs together. It all kind of just feels the same. As I spoke to like the humming aspect of it, it's like one long linear note that just goes. But I think when the most memorable scenes or episodes happen is when we get the break, the emotional element, the heart that's being shown from the characters, or they're put out of their element in a situation. We have topics that go throughout the seasons, like who's the best friend, the romance, the job changes. And I will give the show credit on this, is one thing I really did like about this show, and it was successful to an extent, is that it never really did rotate characters. It never got rid of
Yeah.
characters. It never really replaced it. It utilized the characters at hand to really move these cliche stories along. So a lot of shows, if it tends to get stale, Fox did kind of cancel it. But I think the intent was people were getting bored with these characters. But that's why I think the second half of these seasons really did take it in a new direction. It has that feeling, it has the elements, it's still formula, but they had little bursts of exclamation marks of what these characters do in these situations, other than just kind of a running joke. So there isn't a bad season in this show because it all kind of runs together. And this is the type of show, if you like Parks and Rec, if you like The Office, this is going to be your kind of cup of tea because it banks on the cliche stories. It banks on the situation and have the characters run around these situations and how they react to the certain situations. It's the same kind of concept. So this is a kind of a unique taste for a lot of people when it comes to their comedy. But if you are a fan of those comedy shows, this is one that you will really be a fan of when it comes to how this rolls in your comedy taste.
I agree, and I'm trying to think, why would you not like this show? And maybe some of the characters can be a bit cartoonish, but that's a sitcom, right? And we've got that in everyone. I mean, we talked about Schitt's Creek, and I said I didn't particularly like Roland but we won't start that argument. Our rift has just healed about that. Having said that, the funny thing is, to quote In Real Life, other than sort of yourself, and I know a couple of other members of the Brain Trust, and Joey from Game Club Pod, I don't know anyone else actually in my day-to-day who's watched this show, which I think is a crying shame because even me, I don't think I started watching it till late on. So I probably didn't see it till maybe 2018. And maybe it was because of the whole cancellation and, it coming back again. I don't know. I'm not going to sit here and say I remembered exactly, but it then became a firm favourite during COVID again, lockdown, because it's perfect. It's 20-minute episodes. It's generally good-natured. There's a few poignant episodes. A really interesting thing you said is it's got its key cast. And I'm going to go through them, and I think they're brilliant. It's kept them all. In fact, the few episodes I didn't like, there's only a few, was when they did try to, spoilers obviously for this, but like a couple of times when they move Holt out of being the captain and they bring someone else in, and I didn't like that because it felt jarring. And they bring in is it Bill Hader, I think, at first, who was a really over the top character, wasn't it? Real caricature. And then the guy, I can't remember his name, but who plays the Vulture, who is funny but wasn't Holt.
Yeah, it's kind of like when The Office was trying to replace Michael Scott, but the intent was to go over the top here. Here you have a Hader that does go over the top. You have the underqualified one that bows his head on the table and doesn't know what to do. So there's a lot of, to me, I think they could have gone further with some of that concept to kind of go over almost the politics in a comedic way of how a police precinct works. So, but I think they didn't do enough with some of these situationals because it's a 20-minute runtime and they don't have enough time to do that. They want to focus on the primary characters, knowing that these are going to be throwaway characters and it really doesn't matter. But in a way, that's a flaw to give us, again, the mental break of what we've already seen before. So it would have been a really intelligent of these writers to really hone in on something different to give us breathing. And when it comes to, I think the NBC released it, I think, correct me, but 2018, a couple years before everything shut down. And I think this was smack dab in the middle of a season where people got enticed to really watch this show. And again, 20-minute episodes is not a lot of time invested. And I think this would have been a mistake to even go further with longer episodes, that we saw a lot of the specials during COVID. So I think when it comes to how this timeline of this show was treated is actually smart, and it did it justice, because I'm with you. I didn't start watching this show till I think almost about 3-4 episodes in. Then I kind of got attached to it. So, but when that released, I didn't watch it on streaming. I went in on like the 4th episode, and I didn't really feel like I missed anything from it. It just kind of goes. You can go into almost a middle 3rd season, 4th season, and still have a good time with it without losing any depth or feel like you've missed something. So these are individual sitcom stories that no matter where you go, you're going to land in something that's at least entertaining.
Yeah, that's a really good point. You can absolutely pick this up at any point. And for this episode, I didn't rewatch all of it. I rewatched some of my favorite episodes, and having a look at it, they are spread out through all 8 seasons. But you can pick a random episode from any season, and yeah, like I said, have a good time with it. It's really good at that. In terms of the characters, so I really like this cast. I think it's a really great ensemble. So you've got Andy Samberg plays Detective Jake Peralta. Melissa Fumero plays Amy Santiago. Andre Braugher, as we said, is Captain Raymond Holt. Stephanie Beatriz is Rosa Diaz. Terry Crews is Terry Jeffords. Chelsea Peretti is Gina Linetti. Joe Latrulio is Detective Giles Boyle. And you've got the brilliantly named Dirk Blocker is Michael Hitchcock. And Joel McKinnon Miller is Norm Scully. So Holt is the captain. Terry is the sergeant, isn't he? At least at the start. You've got Gina, who is Holt's assistant, isn't she? And then the rest are all detectives. So as a cast, I think they really work well together, and they are part of the appeal for me.
You have all these contrasting personalities. You have Sandberg, that is just literally the cartoon that you have no idea how the hell he's a police officer or how the hell he keeps a job.
He's the boy who hasn't grown up, right?
He is, and he has a loaded weapon, which is terrifying. So, and then you have the 2 dumbasses. You have Hitchcock and Scully. You have all these over-the-top personalities that one would say, do these people really work at a police precinct? But it's not necessarily about that. It's almost any work environment are going to have kind of these personalities. And I think that's what this show is going for. Not everybody's going to relate to working in a police precinct. And they didn't want to go full on, let's tell you about a police precinct, because that would just be boring. And in this kind of situation, it doesn't work. So they needed to add, it's almost like that show Superstore, where you really have to add these characters that people can relate to in any work environment. And I think that's what this is. And I think this is why it works, because it doesn't just target a specific audience. It targets audience that has a job with these characters. We all have worked with a Hitchcock and Scully, and to an extent, I wish they actually did make a spin-off show on just those 2, because those are my favorite characters next to Holt's character. So I think that's the main attraction to this, is that it's brilliantly cast with these personas that a viewer can really kind of attach themselves to.
Yeah, and they have all got their kind of stereotype characters. So as we said, Andy Samberg, Jake Peralta, is the great detective, but the kid. He's still not grown up. Amy is, she's a really good detective, but she's the quote unquote nerd, right? I mean, there's the amount of time she looks really excited when someone says there's a binder, like there's a binder full of information, and you just see her face glaze over. Holt, we've said, is the captain, and he's very much the authoritarian, very stiff upper lip, very, what's the word? Not aloof, but in contrast to them, he's the almost like the boring
the foundation
person.
Kind of deal.
Yeah, like we'll get into it in the pilot. They call him the robot. You've got Rosa Diaz, who's a scary, serious one, right? But she does have like to get sarcastic and have a laugh as well. But she's the one who, you'd be terrified of if she turned, right? Terry is, he's a funny one, isn't he? Because he's a mix between wanting to be the good sergeant, but almost being one of them, but almost doesn't want to admit he's one of them in terms of how he behaves. And my word, he's very built in this, isn't it? I mean, he still is, isn't he? But they like to show that off, don't they? Gina is the funny one. When we talk about characters, she's the one my wife likes the least because, she's very sarcastic. She's almost like the mean one. We always say there's got to be a mean one in this, and it's kind of her. But I think it's just she's very, and I don't say this in a truly mean way, but very full of herself, and everything revolves around her, right?
She's like the Samberg character in female form. So you have to have kind of these two. At one point, I was waiting for those two to hook up because they are the same damn character to an extent. It's almost a more abrupt selfishness to Gina than we have with Samberg, because there is an innocence versus a selfishness to Gina's character. But the performances are almost identical. And it's almost like watching Samberg with a wig. Is because their mannerisms are almost identical to an extent when it comes to how they deliver their comedic performance. I just go back and I watched it last night of her getting hit by the bus.
Oh,
and
yes,
just the screw in the head and just how she performs. And it is, I'm with your wife, Dan. I find her absolutely obnoxious. So to the point where when she got hit by the bus, I was standing up and clapping.
Do you know what the funny thing is? That's the sort of character normally I wouldn't like, but I don't know, she does it really well, because we will see she's always there for the team ultimately. But yeah, she's probably the character you're going to either love or hate, right? I can't remember if I mentioned him in the rundown, but you've got Joe Latrulio, who plays Charles Boyle. Now, Boyle is, again, he's another good detective, but he's very much almost like another nerdy one, loves his food, very food oriented, and absolutely in awe of Peralta, right? He is his best friend, or he believes he's his best friend, and Jake can't do anything wrong, and he wants to always be with Jake, do everything with Jake, right? And then you've got Hitchcock and Scully, who are retiring or getting close to that retiring. So they are very much bumbling detectives. They are the cartoony ones, I'd say, in this. But they do get a funny flashback episode, don't they? There is a flashback episode to them to show them when they're in their youth. I wish there was more on that. But tell you what, should we talk briefly about the pilot? Or which way do you want to do it? What I want to talk to you about is the pilot, the final show, generally how the season went, favourite episodes, favourite episodes, and our best and worst characters. So how do you want to hit that?
I think it's just traditionally right. Let's talk about the pilot, and then we can lead up to everything else, because I think that's a great transition.
Okay. Well, the pilot is called Pilot, and on IMDb, it's got 7.7. Ultimately, this revolves around, we're going to meet them first, aren't we? So we see, I think it starts off with Jake and Amy investigating a robbery at an electronics store. We then get introduced to the new captain the next morning, and this annoys Peralta because I think we see a flashback. His previous captain basically let them do whatever they wanted, right? And I think you see him and Rosa doing a fire extinguisher race, right? Don't they, on their office chair? And that's what we were saying earlier. So Jake's sort of mocking, saying, I bet it's going to be a robot, and does this robot act just as Hulk comes in, who makes him repeat every single word, tells them that they all have to, or he has to start wearing a necktie, which you can see Jake obviously isn't happy with. The main episode then investigates a murder of a luxury food importer. But ultimately, it focuses on them catching him. I know I'm doing this very abridged, but we see them all working together. And at the end, there's a pretty cool scene of them in the warehouse, isn't there, where they arrest the guy. But I think for me, and I'll ask for your view on it. For me, I've made a list of notes, but one of the cool things they do is when Hulk walks in, he asks Terry for a breakdown of all the characters. And I think that's a really clever and effective way of introducing you, the viewer, to each of them, right? So what's your view on the pilot?
This one, I think, is one of the more brilliant pilots that we actually have talked about on this show, because I think it balances its time effectively when it comes to the balance of introducing the characters, the comedy, even adding the situational unity of the precinct. So in a 23-minute runtime, I think it does a fantastic job of giving the best example of how a pilot should go. You get little snippets of the characters interacting with each other. You get the rundown, which I agree was a brilliant move. And then you have the situational arrest or whatever it may be towards the end of them working together. So I think this one out of the show, even though I'm not saying it's the best show we've covered, in my opinion, I think it's the best pilot that's been introduced.
Yeah, I can't disagree with you there. It is really good. It does a great way of introducing you, as I said, to the people. I mean, what I like is it starts off by almost attempting to be like a serious cop. You've got Jake speaking in that serious tone, haven't you? And you think, you know, what are you watching? And then it soon deteriorates. I mean, his attitude. It also, I think, it sets out the scene. So you see Peralta being goofy, and right at the start, and Santiago, Amy being the serious one. And what I like, though, actually, is you can see them break. There's a bit right at the start where he's got the teddy. There's in the electronics, or there's a teddy with a nanny cam in it, and he's pretending to talk as the teddy. And they're both almost breaking, I think, as he's doing this thing. So I'm sure some of that was ad libbed. What I did like, and it is a theme that runs throughout. Now, I'm not going to say it's a CSI or an NCIS or a Y or anything like that, but I think what this episode shows as well is though that they do have sometimes some proper policing in it, if you know what I mean. So there are elements, and to me, it always sticks in mind for The Office, the American Office. Where if you listen to the Office Ladies podcast, Ricky Gervais always said you've got to make, if you're going for it as a sitcom, you've got to make the Michael Brent character, the David Scott, sorry, in America, you've got to make him likable, because otherwise people just won't. You know, you make him aloof, but make him likable, make him a good salesman. And I think it's the same here. If they were just goofy police, goofy detectives week in, week out, like you said earlier on, you wouldn't, how did they ever get to that point? But the fact they do throw in some serious policing, criminals and storylines overall, I think does a good job of keeping it grounded a little bit.
Yeah, I think you're 100% right, because the situation is 100% important here, because you have to have that counteract to the characters. So, and you have to have those certain elements of the policing. And we saw it from, I can't remember the season, I think it's 6 or whatever it may be, where Jake is charged with robbery. And we have everything that's going on in the background when it comes to the investigation leading up to the 2-part court case, that they really have to go into that police work. And court and jury trials, that is a very scary topic to cover in a comedy. And they do throw just enough in to balance the investigation, the comedy, the stakes. So I think if we're talking about what you're talking about, I think that is the perfect 2-part episode to really define how they balance the comedy and the police work, because Jake and Rosa have to actually still hold their professionalism while they're trying to clear their name. So, and I think that is a brilliant balance when it comes to how they demonstrate in this show the police work and the goofiness of the characters.
Yeah, so, and I said, look, don't get us wrong, you're not going to get a CSI episode in this, but they do throughout the series. They've got like the Oolong Slayer. There was the, I can't remember, but there was is it Figgis, where they go undercover, not undercover, they have to go to live in Florida, don't they, or Miami for sort of new identities because they have to escape a criminal. And like I said, it does enough to keep it saying that, yeah, these people obviously are good at their jobs and that's why they're there. The telling thing is that Terry says about Jake that, you know, he's the best detective the precinct's got. He just won't grow up. Yeah, that's his biggest challenge, is how do you get him to grow up? And I think that's what sows almost the seed of the relationship between Holt and Peralta. And the finale, we'll talk about it, but they do almost become like a father-son pairing in terms of both when they're butting up against each other, you know, sort of the friction they have and the tender moments they have. I mean, I've got a few funny scenes in there where you see how competitive Amy is as well, where she's eating lunch next to, I think it's Hitchcock, and he, you know, she's got the hot sauce and he goes, be careful of that, that's hot. And she goes, oh, really? And pours it all over it, doesn't she? And then she obviously regrets it. And, oh, yeah, we do get a brief flashback of Holt, because this is the interesting thing. They often do this quite subtly as well. So in the pilot, you find out about Holt being gay. And the only reason that that's important is because he does talk about it, or they do reference it throughout the series, but only bits here and there about the difficult journey he had to get where he is as both a black and gay detective policeman. And you think that, you know, that's compared to how he is now, or as he presents himself now, it's like nothing ever affected him. But it's those moments where he talks about that and where that comes up, you see that he has had to go through a difficult career.
I loved that piece of Halt because they could have easily gone the easy route and just kept this character so linear, so stern, without any substance, and had all the other characters work around him. And the fact that they added that is brilliant because it adds some messaging to this without going overblown. It's not cliche. It was believable and it added substance to the Hulk character. And they don't overdo it. They really do give snippets throughout the season, but it feels real. And it feels like as we watch the seasons going on, we remember this piece of Halt that he had difficulty getting into this position. It wasn't easy. It wasn't always by the book. It wasn't what people stereotyped him as. It wasn't something that he chose to just hide who he is. He really did have to work for this position. And I love that they identified with that without it being an ongoing conversational piece throughout the seasons. Is they landed it and it made it a piece of the character, and rightfully so. And it made him have more of a personality going into the future episodes, which I absolutely loved.
Yeah, because then they also introduce, and I can never remember the name of the actor who plays him, but his husband, Kevin Costner. I have to say that carefully. It's not Costner, it's Kevin Costner. The reason I say I can never remember him because that the guy who plays him is in everything as well, isn't he? Like The Good Place. He was in The Man on the Inside recently, the Ted Danson thing. And again, it's, you know, we discussed our last episode, Schitt's Creek. You know, we talk about representation. Again, they do a good job here in terms of Holt and Kevin's relationship by not making it a thing other than a loving relationship between two people, right? And you also get the storyline later on in the seasons with Rosa coming out. She comes out bisexual, doesn't she? You get the episode of Terry being stopped by police because he's black. And you get, as we said throughout the episodes, you do get a little bit more background of Holt's journey. So I think it does a good job of relaying these characters' experiences without it being overly, what's the word, cliched. And other than, I think, the first episode of the last season, which we'll come on to, I think they generally do a really good job of it.
They really do. And Halt just is that foundation that really does set the standard for the other characters. One of my memorable moments of this is when Jake and Halt have the mumps and they're quarantined in the house. That is their moment. That is almost their bonding moment to an extent, where it leads up to Halt teaching him to wear a tie kind of deal, the expectations, making him be the adult figure, the adult police professional. And it leads up to them being quarantined together where they're really drugged up, learning kind of about each other, but they're just bonding over a big growth in their neck. And I thought that was a brilliant episode of almost the crossroads of these two really relating to each other.
Yeah, and kind of you just remind me as you talk about that, because there's the episode where Holt was getting death threats, but to Holt, he didn't even mention it because he's like, you know, I've had worse in my past or something. Whereas he's, you know, Kevin and Jake are really freaked out about it and want to do everything to protect him. And he's almost like, isn't there an episode where he gets stabbed and doesn't say anything? He just sort of gets on. Oh, I don't want to, because you mentioned there the tie. The reason I specifically said tie is because it's a funny thing, because obviously Jake's got a real beef with this because he's making out, oh, he wants to make us all stuffy. But so much so, isn't there a scene in the pilot where he stands up at his desk when Hulk comes in and he's just in his pants, isn't he, Jake, to mock the whole suited and booted thing. But Hulk doesn't miss a beat and just calls the rest of the squad in to look at Jake in his pants, right, and to humiliate him. Yeah, Jake realises at the end that the tie is like a uniform and the uniform makes them a team, and that's what Hulk's trying to do, is to make them a team. So again, it's showing that at first Jake's saying, right, he's turning me into a suit, but it's not. He just wants them to be the team that he knows they can be, right?
Yeah, it's setting the intent. What is the intent of where this character is going to go? It's setting where Holt is going to expect his team to go. He's setting the foundation of this seriousness and almost a setup to the interactions they're going to have in the future. And I think it was a great setup that really led to something really quick. So, and I think that's what made the pilot very special. Is it goes from tie to underwear, tied to just this comedic situation. So it really does set the tone of where these two characters are going to kind of meet. It's the father figure, like we've talked about, but he's teaching a lesson. And whether that lesson is going to be learned in the first season, second season, third season, it doesn't really matter. But that first episode really does give us the hook to see where not what the other characters are going to do, but what these two are going to do. And we get these nuggets that throughout all the seasons without the relationship being completely focused on.
The only other thing I was going to bring up about the pilot, Jake and Amy are going door to door in like an apartment block, asking people if they'd seen, anything suspicious. And one of them was a guy called Melipnos who appears in the finale. So I don't, if you're watching it out, watch out for Melipnos 8 seasons later or 7 seasons later. But yeah, overall, I agree with you. I think this is a great pilot. It does a great job of introducing people. They don't feel as fully fleshed out, but it was a pilot, and you can tell, I think this was filmed before the others, but the basis of who they are going to be is there. The only other things I've got is it had a different credits. Almost they didn't have any, but the music was different. And I love the opening intro to Brooklyn Nine-Nine. That wasn't there. Rose's voice in the first episode was her normal voice almost. It was much higher, wasn't it? Because then she develops that much lower voice. So when you're going back to it, I think that her voice in that first episode really stands out. Was there anything else from the pilot for you?
No, I think it was just, honestly, you touched on it, it's always, and this is what I love about this show, is going back and comparing the first episode to the last episode. And we get those nuggets of the character build, the different strategies the characters learn from the first episode going into the other episodes. So there is a lot of intrigue here on how this journey with these characters really take us through, because a pilot really doesn't tell and justify what the whole show is going to be about. They're figuring it out as they go. Even between the writers and the directors, they don't even have a clear idea until they see the ensemble perform together. And that's where they really have to pivot. And I think that this one is the best example of that.
Let's take a look at the finale. So technically it's a 2-episode one. You've got The Last Day Part 1, which was 9.2 rated, and The Last Day Part 2, 9.4 rated. I mean, I won't go into it, but ultimately the whole story is that Holt and Amy are leaving the 9-9. So I think Holt goes to be the deputy commissioner and Amy's heading up a reform program. Throughout the season, they do these heist episodes, which are some of my favorite ones. And basically the premises of that is that it's to prove who is the best detective. And by doing that, they do crazy shenanigans, right? I think that's the only thing to say. Jake will get something of value, often not of actual value, and whoever gets that at the end of the day is the best detective / human being in the world. So Jake organises a final heist for them all to take part in. But what he hasn't told anyone other than Amy is that he's also decided to leave because him and Amy, abridged history, get together, get married, have a kid. They're struggling to do both their jobs because she's getting promoted. He's doing, he's a good detective. And we also know he's had a troubled history with his father. His father wasn't a good father to him, wasn't around, and he doesn't want to have his kid grow up like that. So he's also resigning or retiring from the 9-9. So he's doing this heist ultimately as a treasure hunt, but that's going to take them to memorable places throughout their 8 years. I think that's the only way I can really, really sum this up. But I want to know firstly what your view on the finale was.
We've talked about this before. A final episode is one of the hardest things to accomplish because more often than not, it's not satisfying because you have the goodbye. Just like any goodbye, it's never good enough. So, and we get that, I think, more prominent here. I'm not saying it's a horrible send-off, they do what they can given the material that's led up to this point, and I think they do a decent job of taking us through memory lane versus focusing on the characters, of going on this heist to revisit some things. I know the Charles Jake moment of him being put in a magazine as BFFs, or when they first declared their love of being best friends. It was sweet. It was cute. And I think that's how I would define the final episode, is just sweet and cute. Is it satisfying? No. If you love a show, it's never going to be satisfying. It's just going to be okay. And I think that is a testament to how this show really ran, is if you can come out of this show saying it's okay, then that means it was a good send-off. And I think they do a good job on giving equal time to the characters and equal screen time. So I think, to me, I'll give it a compliment. It was okay.
See, I liked it. And the other thing I meant to say is that obviously Rosa had also left a 9-9. And actually, I alluded to it earlier. I'll digress now. Is the thing they didn't handle really well was the first episode of the 8th season came during COVID and the George Floyd case. And you could see what they were trying to do. They were trying to address that, and the bad element within the police and COVID, etc. But I think because they only had 10 episodes, it felt like they really went in on it in that first episode and then almost let it go. And they bring in John C. McGinley as almost like the baddie of that season, but he's in 3 episodes, and I just feel, I'm not saying they didn't need to do it. I just feel they had to do it really quickly because if you think about it, the finale's 2 episodes, so that makes a 10 episode run 8. There was a couple of other episodes where they were leading up to the finale, so it just felt like it was shoehorned in. And whereas we said at the start, what they did with Terry, what they did with Jake and Razor, what they did with Holt and Kevin, it just felt it didn't have the time to breathe properly. I don't know what your view on that is.
No, I think you nailed it. It came at a wrong time about a police precinct. It came at the wrong time to promote comedy. But that's when I use the phrase of ignore the noise, because whatever happens outside of entertainment is there to take us on an escape. And I'm the same way with late night shows and politics, is people want entertainment to escape the nastiness of the world, no matter what the topic is. Entertainment doesn't have to have the need to address everything that's happening in the world. It's quite the contrary, is to take us out of the real world as an experience. Do people expect Cheers to tackle huge topics of alcoholism and drunk driving as a forte every single time? It does in a couple episodes, but it's not heavy-handed. So the main intent of a sitcom is to make us laugh, feel some happiness for 20 minutes, and move on with life. So, and I think that's where I think it does get a little derailed to an extent, is it feels the need. And a lot of people in TV and Hollywood feel the need, but that doesn't mean that your feeling is always right. It's the moral aspect that you just feel you have to do something, and I get it. But this is a show that spent all these seasons entertaining and trying to make us feel good and feel something. And I think it's out of character for a show like this to do so.
As I said, I don't mind it if they'd have handled it a bit better, because we'd seen it throughout. Like there's the episode where, and again, I can't remember the actor's name, but there's like an old school detective comes in as Jake, one of Jake's heroes, and then we find out he's I can't remember, he's either racist or bigoted, and Jake decks him, doesn't he? He goes from being his hero to his villain. And we get in one of the early seasons where one of like the senior police or the police commissioner's son is vandalizing cars, etc., and he threatens Jake, ultimately says, if you arrest my son, I'll have you fired, etc. But Holt backs Jake up and they do it. So it just felt that I think the short and truncated season just felt like it didn't get the Brooklyn Nine-Nine way of handling those things. But back on the finale, the only reason I talk about that is because, Rosa had left because she wasn't happy with some of the elements in the police. So she's private detective now, I think, is it? Or a private investigator. I'm really digressing all over the place. So I think I liked it mainly because normally, the goodbyes are terribly sad. And I get quite emotional about these goodbyes, especially when you've grown with, a great group of people like this. And I've just said, you've got Rosa who's left, Holt is leaving, Amy who's leaving, Jake who's leaving. but it does the clever thing of right at the end, it shows like about a year later, and it shows them all come back to do another heist, and they said, oh, we're going to do this every year from now. And it just fills in that thing of they're not going to see Jake again. And Jake was the life of that. And Terry and Charles are on their own now. What, who are they going to sort of, who are they going to be friends with now? And I think for me, that's what is like the icing on the cake, is that they all get their happy moments. They all get the moment which was memorable to those characters in the previous 8 seasons. But it also shows them, and when you've got Hulk coming in as the janitor with the wig on and the cap, you see them still together at the end. And I think that's, for me, the really important part of that finale.
Yeah, I agree. And as I was rewatching last night, I thought about the final episode of Seinfeld, how it just jam-packed all these characters from the past. It spent more time trying to make sure everybody gets their screen time. And here it feels appropriate. It feels good because everybody does have their screen time, but it does. And you're right. It has that exclamation mark of the happy ending where we're not just left as a goodbye, but being reunited of what happens next. So, and I think that's really important for when it comes to the season finale, is not just having an ending, but having something that almost hints at a continuation, even though the show will not go on. And I think that really does almost amplify everything that we saw from that season, is giving us that warm feeling that they're going to be okay. They're going to see each other every year. And I think that is wildly appropriate for a comedy show like this to really end on. If it just ended like we had in that Seinfeld episode in just a negative tone or the heist just ending with goodbyes, that wouldn't have sat well. And that's why when I said a season finale, if it's okay, it's good. And I think that is what amplifies this as okay for me.
I think we're saying at least it's not a terrible one. And for me, I think it's a show that stuck the landing. As I said, for me, it's important that I know they're all still there, all friends, all happy. And they're always going to have a drink together. There was something else. Oh, yeah. The other funny thing about the finale was literally just at the end as they're leaving the precinct, Jake switches the light off, kind of like in Cheers, isn't it? It's like a throwback Cheers, and they have a go at him. And they say, "No, you do realise people are still working here." Okay, right. So we've discussed the pilot, the finale. One I was going to say before we talk about our favourite episodes, I did have a look. The highest rated episode was one I went to rewatch because I remember I did like it, but I'd stopped watching it at that point. It's called The Box. I don't know if you remember it. It's 9.5 rated. It's a funny one because it's just Jake and Holt, and they're interrogating a dentist who's accused of a murder, and it's just almost the three of them, the two of them trying to get a confession out of this guy who's, for 99% of the episode, more than a match for them at evading their questioning. So do you remember that one?
Oh, God, I don't think I remember that one.
It's actually a really good one, as I said, mainly because normally when an episode focuses on just one or two characters, it's often a sign that it's going downhill or they're trying, they don't know what to do now. But yeah, that is a really good episode. Check it out if you're listening and you haven't seen it. But yeah, just jump to it. It's a good one. And the worst rated one was 5.0, and that was actually episode 1 of season 8. The one we were talking about. So yeah, those are your highest and lowest rated episodes. So if I was to say to you, were there any standout episodes for you?
There was 2 that really stood out to me. That one I think we've already talked about, which is the Mumps episode. That I think I laughed harder in that episode than any other episode because it was just so ridiculous and funny. These 2 guys quarantined in a house, naming their big neck sores. Whatever Holtz was Rebecca the fire-breathing dragon, whatever it may be. So that one, what to me was the funniest. But one that I actually did find the most well-rounded, if I were to define it, is when Jake beats Amy's father for the first time. And he does all this research, an ex-cop does all this research on likes and dislikes, and he just tries to please. It almost reminds me of Meet the Parents to an extent, that it's so obsessive that Amy's father has his own binder of research he did with Jake. So to me, I thought that was clever when it comes to these police detectives detecting each other when it comes to an individual that they both love and care about. So I thought that was the most endearing game of cat and mouse between a father and a boyfriend. It's the dad in me, I guess.
And of course, Jimmy Smits is Amy's dad, isn't he?
Brilliantly played.
Yeah, I'm cheating because I'm picking a load of episodes. For me, there's the party, season 1, episode 16. That's the one where they get invited by Kevin Costner to a dinner party at Holt's house, don't they? And the whole thing is about them trying not to make fools of themselves, and it's about Jake trying to pretend that he reads what was it? Is it the New Yorker magazine?
The New Yorker, yeah.
And Kevin had written an article or read it the night before or something and was trying to question Jake, but Jake had obviously only seen the headline because he reads the cartoon pages, and they've got the magazines in the toilet and they keep anyway. It reminds me kind of a classic Frasier episode like the Ski Chalet where they're all going in and out of things and getting up to shenanigans. You've got Beach House, which was season 2, where the squad go to a beach house to relax, and Jake invites Holt, who makes everything slightly boring. So they start having 2 parties, don't they? One which is with Holt in, where there is a lot more prim and proper, and then you've got the one where it's a raging party and they rotate around them until Holt finds out. Ding Dong, season 7, because someone I'm going to mention after, where Holt's nemesis, Madeline Wunsch, dies, and there's a whole thing about the funeral. And I will finish by saying, again, cheating, obviously, anything with another character I'll mention after, with Doug Judy in the Pontiac Bandit. So any episode with him in, I do like that. And the final season, or the final episode with him in season 8, PB&J, that for me, that's a great one. Right, I don't want to finish on negative. So if you had a worst character, I think you've already said it, but who's your worst character?
You know what? I don't want to be repetitive, but it's really hard, and I don't know. I think I have to stick to my guns here. Give me a second. I'm trying to see if I want to contradict myself here.
You can contradict yourself.
You know what? I'm going to go on a limb, and I know I'm going to get pushback on this, and I'm not going to go with the normal cast here, but I have to go with Craig Robertson. I know. I love him, but my God, I wouldn't have said it if I didn't rewatch the entire series. But I love the man, but he plays the same damn character in everything that he does. So I think if they would have done something different with him, I know it's only 9 episodes, but at the same time, if you've seen one of his performances, you've seen it all. So I think it was more of a placing him in this as people reminisce The Office and just kind of relate to just a familiar face. They don't use him. The performance isn't unique. And that would be on the list if I wasn't going to pick my number 1, which we've already talked about.
So you said Gina ultimately, didn't you?
Yes.
Right. If I had to pick one throughout the series, the one I would actually say would be Adrian Pimento. I didn't like him. I like the guy. I think he was played really well, but the character just was that next level of extreme, wasn't it? It was.
If you didn't pick him, I probably would have, because he was on kind of my list too, because he is, again, one of those characters that he plays the same damn person. Yeah. So, I fully support your choice, Dan.
Yeah, I haven't got an issue with the way he was portrayed, but the character itself. And this is where you're probably not going to like me. If I'm looking at the main squad, it's not that I don't like them, but if I had to pick my least favourites, it probably would be Hitchcock and Scully.
Damn you.
And the only reason being is I think out of them all, they are just that little bit too oafish. And it's like you said, it's we do get a couple of flashbacks, and apparently they were like great detectives when they were younger, but they are the comic relief characters. I get it. They are the really sort of cartoon characters. But I'm not saying I hate them. I'm just saying I think out the squad, they're the 2 I like least, mainly because of how over the top cartoonish they are.
I will go on defense of these two. This is the overtop version of complacency. These two know they're almost on their way out, and they just teeter into this.
Yeah.
There's an episode that is adorable with these two, because it shows their childlike mentality of being old. I don't care. I have tenure, whatever it may be. Is Terry Crews chopping a meatball sub in half because only they ordered two, got one. And then he says, nobody gets it. Just the look of disappointment in these two. Give them back their meatball sandwich, you son of a bitch. Because it is heartfelt. I felt for them when Terry Crews took their meatball sandwich. But you know what? If you're going to double down on that, I'm going to say this. Andy Samberg is on my list too.
What is worst?
Overdone. So if you're going to go after my boys, Dan, I'm going after yours.
We're really going to fall out. No, like I said, what I do love how Hitchcock and Scully are an item almost. Like there's a brilliant bit in the finale, and I think I do mix them up. I think Hitchcock has pretended to have been retired and living in Brazil. He's not. When they reunite, I think him and Scully are hugging, and Hitchcock goes something like, "Oh, you've got wing sauce on your collar." And Scully goes, "I put it there just for you." You know, and it's just such a beautiful, beautiful moment. And like I said, I love the friendship these two have. But I just feel that I just hope you and I can get through the next 10 minutes and you know, we've got more episodes I want to record. Favourite characters then, I'll start. I've got two. I'm putting them together because ultimately I had Holt down. Holt was my first character. I think he's great. I just think the way he portrays him, like I said, the genuine, how he sometimes acts like one of them, but in his own way. You know, he doesn't go all goofy, but he does his version of goofy. But what I've then done is I've actually put Peralta, but them as they're my Hitchcock and Scully for you. You know, together, like Peralta on his own can be quite annoying, but you put Holt and Peralta together, and it's that relationship they have, which is what keeps me wanting to watch it.
I can see that.
And I've got special mentions. I've got special mentions for Doug Judy, the Pontiac Bandit, played by Craig Robinson. Kyra Sedgwick, who plays Chief Wunsch, who is Holt's nemesis. But the biggest special mention, Cheddar, Kevin's dog. Kevin and Holt's dog. Who is his own character. If you see, he does star in a couple of episodes. So, yeah.
Well, if I had to pick my favorite, I don't think I've talked about him enough. But that would be Charles.
Okay.
Charles. And again, we've talked about Holt. Holt is my ultimate. I 100% agree, but I don't want to be repetitive. But I would say Charles just because after rewatching a couple episodes last night, the last couple of the trial scene where he dyes his hair, he sold me on a line that he delivers after he bleaches his hair blonde and he's in a wheelchair and he says, you know what, down under, I have a Cruella de Vil thing going on right now. And by that line of him dyeing his pubes just really sold me on his performance. It takes a brilliant actor to talk about dyeing one's pubes and to go crawl Cruella de Vil on your pubes. I give him credit on his acting style. So I think he gives a new level of nerdy, but likable without going cringy. So I think the performance is good. And I think the character is unique enough to keep our attention on what ridiculous nerdy thing he's going to say next. Besides him, I have to go with the absolute lovable Terry Crews.
Terry's is another great character. He's going to be not the comic relief one, but because he's a sergeant and you see him as big as he is. But there's that episode where he's trying to build the doll's house for his daughters, who are brilliantly called Cagney and Lacey, and I think he ends up smashing it up. You've got the one where his wife's pregnant and Jake finds out, and then Jake accidentally lets everyone in the department know, and they're trying to keep it a secret from Terry. Yeah, Terry is he's an important character there, and you can see absolutely him finishing up as the captain. I think that's a logical, and again, for me, going back to the finale, a perfect finish for that. But I still say Doug Judy should be in your list as well. But no, oh, Charles, sorry, I wanted to go back to that because Charles gets some really good storylines, and I think he is not that he flies under the radar, but you've obviously got Andy Samberg, who is the star. You've got Hitchcock and Scully because they're the double act. You sometimes feel like, because Charles goes through a funny character arc, doesn't he? Because in the pilot, he's pining after Rosa, isn't he? But then that kind of stops really quickly. And then there's he gets the storyline where he has a one night fling with Gina, which turns into a bit more than a one night fling. You've got the story about his ex-wife keeping his sperm hostage. Pretty much, there's that storyline. You've got the storyline where him and Jake, they go on a stakeout, don't they, and start driving themselves crazy. I think he's a great character in that, and yeah, he's very nerdy, but just shows undying devotion to his best friend, or who he sees as his best friend, right?
Well, and I think that's the key to this character is he is under the radar, but he's prominent because he really does want to please. He really does want to be happy himself without being selfish. You brought up the sperm episode, and I think that's an important episode because he wants to find this happiness with this girl. I think he only dated for 6 months, whatever it may be. And he wants to have kids, and he's just so submissive to his ex that it really does show the example of what kind of this nice guy he really is, that he really does want to try and please everybody, because even at the end of the day with the hairdresser that he's willing to give up, he just wants to make both parties happy. And I think that's what makes Charles a really likable character here, is he really wants to promote not necessarily the fun factor, but the happiness feel good factor. And I think that's what gives him the watchability going through the entire series.
That brings us to the end of this. I did have just a couple of one-off things to say. So if you're watching this, at the end of each episode, there's I don't know if it's a production company or what have you, but there's a voice that says Fremulon. That's Nick Offerman, who does Ron Swanson. So that's him doing that. I saw that Chelsea Peretta, who ultimately becomes Gina, initially auditioned to become Rosa. She didn't get that, and then they made Gina for her. And Stephanie Beatriz, who did become Rosa, actually auditioned for the role of Amy initially. So, yeah, I love seeing things like that as well, where the what could have been. But any final words from you, Justin, on this? So I think we've said that it's ultimately enjoyable romp, right, with some highs and lows, but generally highs.
Yeah, it's watchable. I mean, again, this is for a specific audience. And like I said earlier, if you're a fan of Parks Rec, The Office, the humor is going to be all there. So you're going to take snippets from it. But the one thing to take away from the show is that it is entertaining. It's 20 minutes to just watch kind of almost just a sketch comedy situational piece that might seem way too familiar in just a different setting, but that doesn't mean it's not watchable, because it is an enjoyable show.
Yeah, and for me, I'd definitely say give it a recommend. I mean, watch your first handful of episodes of season 1. If you don't like it, I think it's not going to win you over. But yeah, if something in those first sort of handful of episodes grabs you, continue. Because as I said, for me, it's perfect. It's one of those shows you can have on in the background, and yeah, it's not offensive. Just something to lift your mood every now and then. So before we go, Justin, do you just want to tell these fine people again about your show and where they can find you?
Yeah, you can check me out over at the Movie Wire, wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also check out the Cult-Worthy Cinema podcast and the Movie Wire's crossover show, Back to the Balcony, that's available on YouTube right now. And you can also follow me on all the socials at Movie Wire Show.
As always, Justin, thank you so much for coming on. We will be talking after this now about the next one, which I already know what it's going to be. So we will have to get some plans ready for that. So for me, you're listening to me already, so you know where to find the podcast. But if you want to get in touch with me to suggest any shows for Pilot Views or even any themes for the podcast in general, just look for Casting Views across all social media.
2, 3, 4. If I want your opinion, I will give it to you. Come on, check what we've got, 'cause you need it. Don't make us get a sport.